Hello, it's Peter Merrick, and I'm so excited. I'm talking to Trevor Parry. He's a modern day Edmund Burke, one of the great philosophers. This man reads, he's read thousands of books. He's an academic. He is also a practitioner in advanced tax planning and financial planning. Trevor, in 1991, got his first master's, and I'm going to repeat that, first master's in history. In 1993, Trevor became a lawyer, and then he decided that he wanted to get his hands dirty, and he became a very successful stockbroker. He is responsible for creating the individual pension plan industry in Canada. He was the typhoid Mary, meaning he went across the country educating professional lawyers and accountants and individual business people on the value of an individual pension plan. And in 2013, Trevor went back to school and got his second master's in tax and law. And I'm so excited, but before I move forward, I also want to share the special connection that Trevor and I have. I wrote my first book in 2007. It was called The Essential Individual Pension Plan Handbook. And I knew very little. And I approached Trevor and his team, and we collaborated on it, and it became, up until my last book, The King of Main Street, my best-selling book of all times. And that book would not have been possible without Trevor's generosity. And that is what Trevor is known for within the industry. We worked on 3 other textbooks and dozens of other collaborative works. And I want to leave you with this. I wasn't really a great expert in IPPs, and I got a call from the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, and they wanted me to present on IPPs. And I knew I couldn't do it without holding Trevor's hand or having him hold my hand. And he came to my rescue as well. And Trevor, today what we're going to be talking about is Canadian history, the context of today. A lot of Canadians are very concerned with the direction of the country. Earlier this month, I spoke with Kim Moody, and we talked about what happened in 2017 when the Liberal government decided that it was going to take its first major shot at the bow of the engine of Canada, small business, men and women who contribute to the tax base. And before I move forward, I was so upset to discover that since the shutdowns have happened, 520,000 jobs have been created, and only 58,000 of those jobs were created in the private sector, and the rest were created for the government. And you just can't have a country that's functional if you do not have a private sector. And many Canadians are looking at Canada, and they're nationalistic, but at the same time, they have to feed their families. So, Trevor, thank you so much.
And thank you for the kind introduction, Pete. And always a shout out to Kim Moody, who's a friend as well, and he and I have an ongoing fashion competition. He likes checks, and I go for the Jacques Parizeau or Winston Churchill 3-piece suit. So one day it's the fashion throwdown. But you're quite correct. There is a flight of capital going on in Canada. There's a crisis of confidence at a Main Street level in the government. And in the future of the country. You know, there are telltale signs that hopefully things will change. We've just elected a new Conservative leader, and certainly he's saying the right things. But Canadian voters can be a fickle bunch, and Mr. Trudeau he controls really much to a great extent as to when the next election is going to be. So hopefully we can right the ship. The Americans face a similar situation. I'm more confident in the U.S., having read de Tocqueville and things like that, that the American spirit will one day reign supreme and they will fix their problems. But Canada is in a real quandary, and that's from a guy who, classic sort of Canadian story, family from both English and French sides. My mother's side, the Tessiers, go back to the first Champlain arrival, 1608. So I assure you, my French is a miserable grade 10 level. I can order beer in a couple of cities, and that's about it. But it's disconcerting to see what is happening here. And again, we hope things change, but hope is not going to do it. It's action that's going to have to do that. And I know I'm and my team are very much on a tax planning level doing that. My message is red meat to entrepreneurs, saying, look, and you mentioned, we've talked about Conrad Black before. We were at the same dinner. Conrad said, when the state takes more than 50% of what you make, it's not morally defensible. And I fully adhere to that belief. And in that regard, Justin Trudeau has been fantastic for the tax planning business. He's created not a figurative or a virtual crisis. It's very real. And my message to entrepreneurs is that, yes, you need to be prudent and comply with the law, but you do not need to pay this level of confiscatory and usurious tax. And so we're very busy in creating wonderful solutions for people. And some of that is preparing for people to leave the country. They've just had enough. And the flight of capital is real. I mean, Kevin O'Leary talked about it when he ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party last time. He put numbers on it, and it was in the tens of billions then. And I've imagined it's much, much worse now. When the Prime Minister invoked the Emergencies Act, I can tell you from, it's anecdotal, but from people who would know, that the flight of capital was profound. When people start seizing assets in the name of a political belief or political wish, you know what you're going to get. Mass uncertainty, and capital does not like uncertainty, and it is agnostic, and it will flee. And that's what's going on in Canada.
I fully agree. I had a really good conversation with Kim, and he shared the story that his mother, who, she created taxpayers, she had children, she paid her taxes, and she believed staunchly in freedom of speech, and she gave $25 to something that was legal. And the antidote that Kim gave me is, he said that the government couldn't have done anything more that would unite all segments of Canadians, being a simple person, a pensioner like his mother, and to the extreme wealthy. Mm-hmm. And his phone went off the hook. I remember that I was in San Diego on a trip. I was living in Canada, and my phone went off on July 18th, 2017, when the government, and maybe you can give some more context to this because of your expertise and as a historian, announced that they were going to make fundamental changes to the Income Tax Act that had never been made like this. And what I mean by that is there was, I believe it was the Carter report.
Yeah, the Carter Commission in the late 60s designed the current Canadian income tax system.
And it took 10 years for them to work through it, and they had
consultation, 3 years to implement. We're all hoping that if there's a Conservative government, that our mutual friend, Mr. Moody, is either chair or on the committee that will tackle fixing and bringing Canada a modern tax system that's pro-business, pro-growth, pro-Canada.
Yes. That would be, I might even think about moving back to Canada.
Is it the 2017 Morneau proposals And I really don't think that Bill Morneau had
Morneau was the finance
was
minister,
the finance minister at the time
for the Liberal government of Canada, which has been in power since 2015.
Mm-hmm. And so Bill Morneau comes from a wealthy family. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Justin Trudeau does, and there's nothing wrong with being born into that. His father is a fantastic entrepreneur, built Morneau Chappelle, which I think has just been recently acquired by TELUS, of all things, and built quite an empire. And so Bill was recruited to run for the Liberals. He was their Bay Street guy to show a level of maturity that maybe wasn't there in the Trudeau government. I mean, I think that they're just the student parliament anyways. For a lot of them, it's their first job, first time to move out of their parents' basements, and I'm not making that up.
Is that like the current king?
Well, the current king is 73 years old, and he's lived next door to his.
Now he has his first. Now he has his first job.
Well, sure. I mean, they work hard. I know you're not a big royal, but I'm not a fan of Prince Charles or King Charles's original politics. But if he now observes the constitutional standard that his opinions are his own, and that he acts as a good and dutiful sovereign, then God save the king. The thing with the Trudeau people was that they were children for the most part. Justin Trudeau's life experience, as we've said, or tangible life experience, is minuscule, and we could go on ad nauseum about his lack of qualification. The only people who were really qualified in that government were really sent to the backbenches. I mean, Marc Garneau is a real intellectual. He's an astronaut, a celebrated and decorated military officer, and you don't see him. Right. So, and I'm often, getting off tangent here, but, as a student of Canadian politics, I've never really agreed with the Liberals, but I have certain of their leaders and some of their ministers I have a lot of reverence for. I'm a big Jean Chrétien fan. I think Jean Chrétien, I love, and I commend people to read Lawrence Martin's double volume biography on him. That's fantastically written political history. Jean Chrétien is a bootstrap kind of guy. Bob Plomendahl wrote a book called the Shawinigan Fox, in which he decisively argues that Chrétien was the most conservative prime minister that we had, and he was the guy who slayed the deficit, not Paul Martin. And what I'm shocked with is that a number of people sitting, who are members of the Liberal Party, who consistently vote for Justin Trudeau, who voted for Paul Martin, who voted for Jean Chrétien, who understand the history of that party and its view on national interest, that they sit at home and say nothing while this current prime minister and his band, as I often say, band of trust fundians, basically loot the country and enact ludicrous and ideologically driven policies that are intentionally damaging the country. You cannot argue that. I mean, this level of what's going on is beyond negligence. There is intent to it. So the Morneau proposals, Billy Morneau was brought in to be the Bay Street face, to provide some degree of comfort and say, look, we're not as a part of, the left wing of our party, the Jerry Butts wing. Proposals that he brought forward were brought forward in the summer with virtually no public consultation, 6 weeks, and would have represented a tsunami in terms of change.
This was in 2017.
Summer of 2017. So they wanted to go after all kinds of things. And who knows where it came from, because the government was doing a lot of things. And I always tell people, and when you and I used to speak extensively publicly, and I tell people, look, the Liberals understand tax. They're not the NDP winning a fluke election. Like I mean, Bob Rae in Ontario, which was like revenge of the substitute teachers. The Liberals understand it. They have some smart people, some smart policy people. They're good politicians. But what I think that was a bunch of, old Marxist codgers in the finance department going to Morneau and basically foisting this upon him, and out he comes with it. And the Trudeau people said, fine, let's do it. And it would have, the flight of capital that's happening now would have happened in 2017. It was an absolute, sea change, a tsunami in terms of changing how tax worked for the small business.
Let's talk about before the changes.
Right.
Well, let's break this down. The Carter Report, which brought in capital gains in 1972.
Right.
The commission happened in 1962, and it took 10 years before they implemented it. And they didn't implement everything, but there was 10 years.
No, they made some compromises, because originally for instance, the whole concept of corporate tax was a compromise, because originally they were going to tax only at the level of the individual, and you would be taxed on the gain in your corporation year over year via personal taxation. And they simply realized that was untenable. The technology wasn't there to do that, and it would have been punitive. Again, they stepped back. The people on the Carter Commission were pretty astute folks. So they brought in a system that worked. Rates were too high.
It was 10 years.
It
was 10 years. And I guess my point is there was full consultation. They were able to step back. But, it's funny, Jerry Butts was the right-hand man, was worm-tongued to Dalton McGuinty. And he's got a degree. I think he's got a graduate degree from McGill. Comes from very common background in Cape Breton, and is somehow fabulously wealthy. You can draw the conclusion as to how. Both know how tax works. Yes.
And once you understand the secrets of the temple, it's easy to quite rightly believe that maybe something nefarious is going on, and maybe they're getting away with it. I have no proof. It's conjecture. But
I have no proof. I just know that the World Wildlife Federation was created by the current king.
No, it was created. I thought it was Prince Philip, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I know the rest. Though the World Wrestling Federation had to change its name. Direct result.
So he ended up getting a lot of money from that. But getting back to the announcement in 2017, and during the summer in July, it was 70 days. They said, we're just going to go and have this done in 70 days. We're going to do something that's never been done before. We're going to be punitive to small business people who put themselves out and employ people. And I thought until that moment in time, before the Liberals got into power, that we had a really great incubation for entrepreneurship in Canada. If you took your money out, you paid the full tax bill for it. If you invested the money, you kept it in, you deferred it, you hired people. It actually was better than any other country in the world. In my opinion, the reason why I share that, because unlike the United States, if you're a business person and you have a child who has, let's say, some health issues, you have to think twice about being an entrepreneur, because you might not be able to get health care. So there's not that basic net. And that doesn't happen in Canada. You have that basic net. And our Income Tax Act, in some provinces, you are paying as little as 11% tax on the first $500,000 of your corporate income.
Yeah, sure.
And it was a deferral.
And that's still there. That the small business deduction is still there.
Of course. However, they changed. They layered all these things. The fact that they'll claw back if you have investment income,
so if you
hire a family member.
Right. Well, so what came out of all of the Morneau proposals was that both, as you know, a number of stakeholders stood up and said they mobilized quick enough and got to public opinion and to the policymakers and say, hold on, this is ridiculous. And there was substantial pushback inside the Liberal caucus. So they pulled on it, whether they intended to impose it all or not. But they did impose the tax on split income rules, which are a Byzantine mess, and are targeting primarily professionals. who have incorporated, and there's no denying that. It's right in the act. The other thing they did was they said, basically, we're going to claw back your ability to have this preferential rate on active business, called the small business deduction. And once you reach 150,000 bucks in a given year, you lose it. You're going to pay what's called the GRIP rate, which is just saying around 26.5%. So we had an extremely preferential tax system. You're right. The Americans under Trump actually emulated Canada to some extent because he pulled down corporate tax rates. They encouraged capital to come back. Now they're seeming to go the other way, but I mean, it swings with the pendulum based on what Congress is doing and who's got the White House. But in Canada, you certainly have a punitive, tax on corporations now. And then when you want to take your money out, you're paying between 40 to 48%. And then, of course, the stealth tax is that if nobody prepares for what happens when a shareholder dies, which you and I have both been active in that field forever, you could pay 73% in Ontario. And if Justin were ever to increase the capital gains inclusion rate, you're going to have effective tax rates in the mid to high 80s. The average Canadian entrepreneur doesn't understand tax. That's not their bailiwick. I don't expect them to. But they should understand that behind the scenes, there's a lot of planning going on, malevolent tax planning that would allow those who aren't planning to be taken advantage of. And then you add on top of that little whispers we hear. So a tax on the principal residence, which I don't think they'll ever do fully, but I think they'll do it.
For
And
American friends, I think
tax.
it's important to share what that is. Because
okay, so in the
it's
United
different.
States, you have the ability to deduct your mortgage interest. And I think there's a certain threshold of capital gains on a principal residence that are not subject to tax. In Canada,
250,000 per
person,
individual, and $500,000 for a couple.
Okay, so in Canada, we don't deduct our mortgage interest, but the sale of our principal residence, and you can do this more than once in your life, is not subject to tax. So for most Canadians, the vast majority of the middle class, their actual retirement is the planned sale of their home. And we've, as you know, seen a massive appreciation in real estate right across Canada. Now, with the interest rates going up, they've come off probably 20 or 30%. So we've engineered a rather large correction, but they're still, very robustly valued. That's the Liberals look at this and they say, well, how do we tax that? And I don't think they would ever come out and say, okay, we're going to make the sale of your principal residence a full-on capital gain. I think they would have some kind of special tax, or more likely, because their whole policy platform is to create class envy, is they'll say, okay, only the rich, only the 1% would have a home worth more than $1 million. Everybody under that, you're fine. We're just going to tax these people. Because Justin and his cadres follow after, Père Trudeau, and they're Marxists.
You mean their current prime minister's
stepfather?
Stepfather?
No, the real. Oh yes, well, no, we can
stepfather.
Yeah, haven't seen him smoke a cigar yet, because I think that'll be the telling sign, right? So, so they see this mass, trillion-dollar asset or asset base, or more than that. Say, how do we tax that? There was a New Brunswick MP who said, "Oh, it's time to do it," and they keep hearing it floating. They've got position papers on this stuff. So Canadians better be aware that your primary asset, not your RSP, not your investment account, not your TFSA, it's your home. And they look at some point, in order to pay for their ridiculous spending, this is a way they'll do it. The other one that they floated is a wealth tax, and they've already implemented this in a proto form with this special tax on profits on insurance companies and banks. That's the test, and from there they will look at taxing businesses, individuals. They brought in a luxury tax now on cars, boats, airplanes, all this kind of stuff. Canadians are an overtaxed lot. Go buy a bottle of wine in Toronto and buy the same bottle of wine in Paris. mean, a good bottle of Saint-Emilion you can get for 5 or 6 euros. It'll be 50 or 60 bucks here, right? Even in the States, prices have gone up, but it's
Just to give perspective to our American listeners, is in Ontario, which is the state, or we call it a province, the alcohol is controlled by the Liquor Control Board, which is owned by the government.
like New Hampshire.
And when they go traveling, they are treated like royalty, because I believe they are the largest
They were
single
They're no
the
longer
largest single purchaser of alcohol.
in the world. They aren't any longer. Costco, I believe, is now that.
Okay.
But it's huge. The Liquor Control Board of Ontario, yeah, they are quite a racket, and they control both wholesale and retail. Some of the other provinces maintain wholesale and have privatized retail, but yeah, it's a big money maker for them. And there are, when you walk in, so for our American friends, the day after Christmas in Canada is called Boxing Day, and Boxing Day is famous for sales. And I always walk into my local LCBO on Boxing Day and say, "Where's the sales? Where's the sale sign?" And they look at me in a bewildered fashion, saying, "Oh, is that right-wing son of a bitch again come to cause trouble?" And I spend too much money on scotch and wine and move on. So yeah, it's a racket. It's not like New Hampshire, where you go into a government-owned store and you have phenomenal deals. I was recently there and got scotch I could not find in Canada. And if I were able to, it was at a third the price.
Well, let's go move into what some people would call conspiracy. And I find this interesting. I didn't know anything of the World Economic Forum, had no idea who they were, what they were. I would hear whispers about these Swiss out in Switzerland, how they had, the settlement, like they would, the settlement bank, and they would have, the World Bank, and they would have, like, there'd be so many things that, average people, why even think about it, right? Because it didn't impact you. And then I discover that the current Prime Minister is a graduate of the World Economic Forum's global leaders. Klaus Schwab, in 2017, the same summer that those communistic recommendation changes to the Income Tax Act came out, had the audacity to speak to an audience in Harvard, talking about how he met with the cabinet the day before of Justin Trudeau, and over 60% of the cabinet had been captured. I mean, we're graduates of the Young Global Leaders Program. And much of what's happening in Canada is not for Canadians, and that's why we're talking. It is actually to fulfill an agenda that any sane person would not agree with. Any parent would not agree with.
I don't know if I subscribe fully to the WEF having tentacles everywhere. I will say that they are certainly not helping their case by some of the pronouncements they make. And then, yeah, if we look at some of the people that are affiliated with them, Chrystia Freeland, as far as I know, is on the executive. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who's Trudeau in address, as far as I'm concerned. A much smarter version. Yeah, is, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's certainly an alumni there. Whether it's a conspiracy theory or not, I don't know. I mean, never underestimate the stupidity of mankind. I mean, a lot of it. That's why a lot of conspiracies don't hold water, because simply people are too stupid to actually pull them off. That said,
well, that's the hope.
there may be smoke, be fire where there's smoke here. I don't know. I mean, my knowledge of the WEF was, you know, as a stockbroker, we had CNBC up on the big screens all the time, and every year the leaders were all off to Davos to do this, that, and the other thing, and it looked like a nice place to go.
Yep.
Maybe it was just a free trip for some people, and maybe some people drank a little more of a Kool-Aid, but who knows? There's some bad actors in the world. There's a few Darth Sidious's out there for sure,
And there's
both
also,
domestic and foreign.
there's
So,
also something else. Forget about just the global leaders. They have the global influencers, people in government in positions of power that they're grooming to be the next generation.
and they don't hold dear the same things that you and I and past generations have. I mean, private property, which is, I think, is the foundation, you know, of liberal democracy and freedom. There's all, and whether they're just paying lip service or they don't think it's going to happen, an attack on private property is that it's an attack on liberty, and it's an attack on the traditions of liberal democracy.
And
in Canada,
the attack of my voice, the censorship of my voice, that goes directly with ownership. Private property and my voice are the same thing to me because both of them are private. Individuals are sovereign.
The market of ideas, free speech, even stupid speech. I mean, I'll defend the rights of someone to offend somebody else. I mean, they may get punched out for it if they violate someone's honor. Okay, that's just the way things work. But you know, in Canada, they're now bringing legislation to moderate or modify or ban content. That's
and who decides? Who decides what's offensive and not?
Well, you know as well as I do. I was in the LinkedIn penalty box for 9 months, and I'm very happy to be back. And I'm not trying to call anyone out and be nasty, and I'm trying to, you know, bring forward some good ideas. But I was never told what I said that got me into that situation. And I dare say that the millennial who decided to ban me for 9 months probably didn't have a deep knowledge of Western political tradition, political philosophy, history, all those things that are very much the foundation to what I say. I mean, I may say some stupid things sometimes. I'm not perfect. No one is, but you're allowed to be an idiot sometimes, and people call you on it. Hopefully you're a big enough man to say, you know what, you're right, I was wrong, I apologize, let's move on and continue our discourse. That's what we've lost. We've lost commonality, we've lost collegiality. In politics, I mean, the whole concept, and I've got my Ronald Reagan bust over there, the concept that Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill could sit down and have a bagged lunch together, that could not happen today. And in Canada, the same thing. Canadians, I mean, I joke and say our national sport is lining up and apologizing. That's becoming less of the case. Politics in this country is becoming visceral. And it is, I fully lay that at the feet of the current prime minister.
I do too.
I mean,
he's broken families. Yep. This October, Canada has its Thanksgiving.
Same
where
as
families get together. In the States, it happens in November, but in Canada, it's in October. I want everyone listening to this to look around the table and see who's not there. And then ask the serious question, who created this division? Who created this crisis? And it comes from the top.
Yeah.
I look at that individual who's at the top. He's an actor, a failed drama teacher, and he speaks hate.
He has no depth of intellect. He speaks both languages well, give him points. He has nice hair as bald men. We have to appreciate that.
Yep.
But no depth. I mean, and again, going back to my knowledge of political history and love of Canada. Look, the Liberals have been in power for generations because they understand get elected. Conservatives have this inferiority complex where they think they can't express their ideas, and if they do, they're a temporary measure, and then they can return to free spending liberal ways. But the fact that this is the party of C.D. Howe, this is the party of Louis Saint-Laurent, this is the party of Jean Chrétien, this is the party of John Manley, this is the party of Paul Martin, and those folks who
And
have
Laurier.
supported them, and going back, of
Laurier
course,
was
one
my
of the best
favorite
prime ministers
prime
we ever
minister.
had. But that
He
people,
was the greatest prime minister.
I will disagree, but he's up there. But the fact that the constituency that understands the history of the Liberal Party and its role in Canadian history and Canadian national identity and national interest, that they have basically turned away and said, "I'll say nothing because we're in power." Do you believe? I can't believe that that's happening. They should be disgusted with themselves. They look in the mirror and say, "This is happening to my country, and I share in the culpability for that." Okay, Justin Trudeau got in 2015 because Stephen Harper probably didn't want to be PM much longer and ran a terrible campaign. And I think he was one of our finest prime ministers. And put the country first and understood policy. But the scenario that we have now, where this fool, this upper class twit, holds to power because he's made a deal with a bespoke, useful idiot in the form of Jagmeet Singh, is offensive. And hopefully Mr. Singh looks in the mirror one day and realizes that his party has been decimated, that they have no money, that they stand for nothing that they used to. Because remember, the NDP was unions and farmers. Unions and farmers are not supporting the NDP. Public service unions support the Liberals. Private sector unions tend to vote Conservative now, and farmers are solidly Conservative, particularly when Justin runs at the ability for them to utilize fertilizer because of his latest, ludicrous green idea. And by the way, I've always referred to the carbon tax, Peter, as the watermelon tax. It's deepest green on the outside and deepest red inside. So we can talk environmental politics if you want, but the fact that this country has been held with this unholy alliance is deeply troubling. And hopefully Mr. Singh realizes he's cut his own throat, and his only way to try to get back, to try to recapture some of these seats that he's lost, is to actually end the agreement that he has with the Liberals and then run a hard campaign and stand for something, not just professional victimology, because that's what they are right now. And if you want to play that game, the Liberals are going to win it every time, right? Because they have money and Justin cries at the drop of a hat.
It's my heart just cracks. Like I was so proud, like how we came out of almost bankruptcy when Chrétien took over.
Yep.
And Paul Martin led us to running surpluses. Yep. And then we had, many people were first frightened of Stephen Harper. Canada fared the best out of the G7 and the G20.
Stephen Harper and Jim
Flaherty the crisis in 2008. Yeah. We had a surplus, and then we have someone who, I just shake my head. I scratch my head. Like budgets balance themselves.
Yeah,
he's a fool. He said he was going to run a deficit for the first few years, and who knew that he was going to run a $1 trillion deficit?
Yeah, you haven't been in Canada in a while. When you come back, you're going to look and visit some of our cities, and you're going to shake your head and say, what happened? Because, we always lament the state of some of the U.S. inner cities. And hey, folks, they're a mess. I love going to the States. Truth be told, I tried to join the U.S. Marines in Gulf War I. The Canadian cities are always thought of as clean and friendly. Go to downtown Toronto. Because he's legalized pot, you and I can't walk around and have a beer. The family would end. You can do it in Europe, not in Canada. But you can smoke pot anywhere you want. And the fact that everybody is still working from home means that they basically have vacated the central business districts of most Canadian cities. And who has replaced them? Homeless, drug addicts, mentally challenged folks. I mean, still ill people. You know, you want to get them help, but what the downtown Toronto smells like urine and pot on a hot day. It is shocking, and I think you're going to find that in most cities. The Canada that you knew, that you and I love, has been irreparably damaged directly by the policies of Justin Trudeau. Our cities are a mess.
And
no one wants to.
I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to his involvement as a globalist, and my hope is these are such stupid idiots. They're going to implode on themselves. However, he is following a script, and why I say it's a globalist script is because it's happening in the Netherlands, it's happening in Australia, it's happening in New Zealand, it's happening in Germany, it's happening in France.
Mm-hmm.
All these people are going what the Rockefeller Foundation had a report in 2010, and they called it lockstep. And it doesn't matter what the reality on the ground is. He keeps on pushing forward things that are anti-human, anti-Canadian. I will stand by those words. Families that are struggling right now, what does he do? He puts on a carbon tax.
Mm-hmm.
Food prices are going through the roof. What does he do, Justin Trudeau? He's going to get rid of nitrogen. Carbon is the gas of life. I've become very good friends lately with Patrick Moore, a co-founder of Greenpeace, who saw that organization focused on the stewardship of Earth being taken over by bigger interests and pushing an anti-human agenda. So when people are struggling, and this is me grandstanding, but I feel this way and you can sense it, and I'm incensed by it, putting on carbon taxes, going and trying to put farmers out of business, stopping refineries, stopping pipelines that would actually make Canada completely independent.
Net export. A German chancellor comes to Canada.
Yep.
And implores of the Social Democratic, so not a right-winger, comes to Canada, supposedly to see his kindred ideologue Justin, to say, can we create LNG from Canada? And Trudeau has the abominable, ridiculous response that I can't see the business case. Ludicrous. Canada is, as Stephen Harper said, we were on our way to becoming an energy superpower. We can again, and we get back to sort of this concept of a carbon tax. I don't agree with taxing everything, or as little as possible. They always use the stick. They never use the carrot. So you and I understand Canadian tax. Research and development in Canada has always been encouraged through a thing called the SHRED grants, scientific research and experimental development grants. And people, there's a small industry of people who prepare these grants and they get them. And the number of grants that actually turn into meaningful revenue are very, very few. So there's a small industry, it's government money. It's typical, right? The Europeans and the Brits years ago, and the Americans to a lesser extent, implemented this thing called a patent box. This is positive, using the Tax Act to encourage. And a patent box is really simple. So it would work like this in Canada. If you want to develop intellectual property, and that could be green intellectual property, it could be any intellectual property, which is the better way to do it. And then you have to decide, is it patents? Is it industrial design? Is it copyright? What is it? As long as that is created in Canada or domiciled in Canada, you would pay a preferential tax rate on revenue generated from it. I would argue you tax it at zero, because what's going to happen is, like Ireland, you have, despite what the teachers of unions have done to public education in the last generation, we still have a pretty educated base in this country, and our universities are excellent. And it would be quite possible that if you were to say to them and to say to organizations that are involved in the creation of intellectual property, we want to promote this. We want to encourage this on steroids. What would happen? What would happen in Alberta? They would become not just producers of energy, they would, and it's there, but we would really magnify it. Alberta would become the place for energy and oil and natural gas technology. And some of that would also have environmental benefits, but they don't even look at it. In the Jerry Butts world, no, we must tax. And then we get into, when I talk to Americans about Canadian income tax, Trudeau is always going on about the 1%. The 1% in Canada is about $180,000 a year. It's half what the number is in the United States. In the US, and you live in the highest tax state in the union. New York's, I think, worse because New York City has an income tax, which is why Rush moved to Florida. And gosh, I miss Rush. The Canadian top marginal tax rate, which in Ontario, combined provincial and federal, is 53.53%, kicks in at $220,000. Folks, that's middle class. That's not the affluent. Nova Scotia, beautiful place where the Blue Nose is. You go to Digby, best scallops in the world. Fantastic place, friendly people. There's a tremendous shortage of doctors. So the vaunted Canadian safety net has big holes in it. If you want to get, a knee replaced fast, not waiting 2 or 3 years, I've looked at it. It's Buffalo for $40,000. So in Nova Scotia, the highest combined marginal tax rate in the country, 54% at 220. Why do you think doctors are going to Florida or North or South Carolina? Because A, yeah, they don't like winter, but B, there's a lot more money in your pocket when you look at that. So again, capital is agnostic and leaving. Human capital is leaving. Quebec, I love Quebec. My hockey team is there. It's the best food in the country. The top marginal tax bracket kicks in there. It's 53.3, I think, kicks in at 108,000, I believe. It's astounding. And the average Canadian is lulled into, they're paying their fair share. Well, to use iambic pentameter, bullshit.
I fully agree with you, and I've been benefiting because my practice is cross-border, and I create the benefits for when they come here.
Mm-hmm.
When they're replacing all their Canadian holdings, like their medical and dental, their disability, their critical illness, their long-term care.
Yeah.
And even if you have a doctor who's going to take over everything themselves that the government paid, they won't pay more than about $40,000, and they will save about $200,000 in tax.
Mm-hmm. Well, so a lot of Canadians think healthcare is free. It is not.
It is not free. When you're being taxed at 53% at $220,000, it ain't free, because then you have to take in that 15% tax that you're paying, or that is it 13%, 14%, but that you're paying for the harmonized tax.
Yeah, each 13% AT. Yeah, but and to my American friends who look north and think it's working, I'm going to tell you, we have rationing. We have healthcare rationing in Canada. They don't call it that, but we do. We have none of these. We have excellent cancer hospitals, but because we don't have private hospitals, you don't see what you do in the US where, there's hope for late stage cancer and that kind of stuff. Certainly they try to treat you here. I'm not saying we're, a third world country or anything like that. We have a pretty damn good healthcare system, but they ration. If you're at a certain point, they're going to go palliative. And at that point is probably before you would see it in the United States. And there's the ridiculous thing is the average Canadian, again, they're so embedded for generations thinking that Canada is the sum total of its social programs that it doesn't bother them that you can get your car fixed this afternoon if you pay for it. But God forbid you want to get your medical condition fixed and you're ready to pay for it. Socialized medicine, which was brought in by, I guess it was the Pearson government, Tommy Douglas, the famous
this is back in '66.
Yeah, so he brings it in. They envisioned user fees. A reasonable user fee, it deters waste and overuse of the system, and it does generate revenue. Canadians get aghast. They want to pillory you if you even suggest that perhaps a public-private hybrid model will work. It's worked in the UK, works in the United States, works in most of the European
Can
countries.
we just follow on that? Because there's something that I want to share.
Sure.
Canada does not have capital punishment. We now have laws that allow for assisted suicide.
We have a culture of
Now,
death.
I believe that's a slippery slope.
We're already there. There was a case recently, Pete, where a Canadian veteran with PTSD was recommended that he consider assisted suicide. It is the culture of death.
And it is a culture of death, and let's explore that, because to me it's fearful. Because if we look at history, the reason why there's laws that prevented that is because, God forbid, government would have the sanction to sanction death.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what it is. And I don't care if someone puts on a white coat and a doctor, so did Mengele.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there is the Nuremberg Code. Now, one thing I want to point, because both of us know this so clearly about suicide. In insurance, there is a suicide clause, and the suicide clause says you will not get paid out the death benefit if you commit suicide within 2 years of purchasing the policy. Mm-hmm. Why is that? It's because if a person kills himself after 2 years, it's for a different reason than when they purchase the policy. So someone gets depressed. We all get depressed. But if, in essence, going back to Bill Gates, when he made that statement, we can't talk about death panels, and you can save enough money for the last 3 months of life and pay for 10 teachers. Human life, and I become more conservative, there is no price, and no one has the right to take away of what the Creator gave each and every one of us. And the fact that this has become sanctioned, it goes hand in hand with every other policy. Because if you have a country that's not functional, where people are starving, where people can't be taken care of, people can't earn a living, they're going to get depressed, and then they're going to do Soylent Green. And for those of you who do not know about Soylent Green, it was Charlton Heston in 1972. I'm going to show a picture of this. And it occurs in what year, Trevor?
Oh, I think it's now. I can't remember.
Today.
It is.
Today, yeah. 2022. Yeah. Predictive programming.
Yeah, it's all there. I mean, we can look at film and it's terrifying as to some of the stuff. I was thinking about that this morning, and one of the films I really recommend that describes the mess we're in, Terry Gilliam's Brazil.
Yes.
That is ridiculously apropos. We've become the great administrative state, the oligopoly, where entrepreneurialism is carried on as guerrilla warfare. De Niro's character in that. We have lost basic fundamental elements of society. I and you, as a person of faith, I think it has a lot to do with that. And I don't want to go down a religious tangent, but love of your life, which is a gift from God, and love of fellow man, we've lost that. People have become dehumanized and become a number. They think nothing about ending someone else's lives or their own. So we've become unfortunately embraced in a culture of death. It can come back, and it's going to have to come back by rediscovering what made our society work. Maybe that's going to be outside influence to do that. There may be, Deus ex machina. Who knows? The Chinese may win a war, and we may realize, oh, what happens? Hopefully, it doesn't come to that. We fought enough. We've seen enough times in history. Shouldn't we be learning?
There's very few people who studied history like you have, Trevor, because someone pointed out something about every human that's born. It's like 50 dates.
Yeah.
that movie where that woman, Drew Barrymore, is with Adam Sandler, and the problem is every day she wakes up, she forgets what happened the day before.
Mhm.
And every time that someone's born, they don't know what happened the day before. And there's one issue that scares me. Within 5 years, so many people in Canada have forgotten the country they had,
Mhm.
the
Oh,
good.
sure.
And it frightens me. I've been outside of Canada, so I've been looking into the fishbowl, and it's completely disturbing. It's an anti-human agenda. I look at what's happened and I cry, and I have to share with you, I cried of joy back in January and February of this year when there was a spark across Canada where Canadians, millions of them, stood up and said, I want my sovereignty. I just want to be left alone.
And I think I agree with you. And I think that if he persists with the farmers, that the Freedom Convoy will be minuscule compared to what's coming. And I think that the vast majority of Canadians will align with farmers. Only hardcore liberals, and we have to look at who those would be. And Trudeau liberals, would they really want to hold in the face of that? No, I think that that's why I think there is hope. I think that there is a change coming to Canada. I think there's an electoral change coming. My fear is this, though, that with the conservative form government, that they embark once again on incrementalism. Brian Mulroney had the ability to take down everything that Pierre Trudeau put in place. Stephen Harper had the ability to take down the more offensive elements, the left-wing elements of the Chrétien government, and didn't do so. If Mr. Poilievre forms government, and I think he will, he has to be absolutely merciless in breaking what Trudeau has built, which means wholesale reductions in the civil service. As you pointed out, the only growth in employment for the most part has been in the civil service. We don't need that. They can find jobs. There's no guarantees in life. That has to be taken down. Freedom has to be reasserted of speech. Something we must do that Pierre Trudeau was instrumental in preventing, which is property rights must be enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights. Americans don't know that. Canadians do not have, no, we all know there are unwritten rights. There's inalienable rights, natural rights, property being one of them, but it's not codified in the Canadian Constitution.
Right.
And that has to happen. And we always say, oh, we don't want to open up the Constitution. The Constitution has to be fixed. Federalism in this country needs to be fixed. And that means that we don't, rape Alberta to pay other provinces. So there are some fundamental things that need to be addressed in this country. But we have to understand, first of all, it's not what government can do for us, because that's all Trudeau's been. It's hand out money, and you've addicted people to government. So it's time for
the first way he got elected is he campaigned on making pot legal.
Yep.
So all these people living in their basement voted for him.
Yep. Well, as I said, visit any of Canada's large cities and the stench is profound. So, I'm not in favor of that law. It's done, but there's no reason the municipalities can't restrict it. So,
and we've traded our independence for safety.
Mm-hmm.
Fear. And you know what the problem with fear is? They've been selling it so much. That's the greatest way to get people to be compliant. Well, people who actually are scared of something, they haven't lived.
That's true.
They haven't lived.
I mean, they say, what's the mark of courage? There are people who were scared but still went anyways, right? Went over the top of the trench. Canadians at Vimy Ridge, You know, that's for me, that should be our national day. I agree with you completely, and I think that with the old line that he who prefers safety over liberty doesn't deserve liberty, and we're seeing that now. And it's time for people of good conscience, people of tradition and sense of history and aspiration, people who simply don't want to, you know, have an existence. They want to aspire. They want their family to do better, their children do better than them. If you still believe those things, I think the vast majority of Canadians do, then it's time to take action electorally, economically, in our everyday behavior and say enough is enough. It's time for people of faith to realize that you don't have to hide in the corner. That is a quintessential element of liberty in our Western society, and it's time to celebrate it, whatever your denomination is.
And these backbenchers, you need to go to their offices when they're there. You have to go and confront them.
Go see them. Be polite, but let them know.
Be polite, but let them know they're on the wrong side of history. But it's not just that, Trevor. I heard the transport minister in Canada say something that should scare everybody in Canada who's been implementing these draconian rules. He said, we didn't make anyone do anything. We just put guidelines. So you know what that means, Mr. Border Guard, Mr. or Mrs. Employee working for Health Canada? You're liable when people go to court. That's what he was saying. Businesses that force their employees to go and make decisions on their health, you're liable. This minister came out and said it. He said, we never forced you to do anything. It's not in the act that they passed in Parliament during this pandemic. So guess what? You're going to be on your own. This government's not on your side. And I'm going to leave this, Trevor, and you can add to it. One of my favorite quotes, and I can paraphrase it. It's Martin Luther King, 3 months before he was assassinated. 3 months. And this is what he said. Martin Luther King, at 38 years old, 3 months before he was assassinated, in a speech, his last public speech, said this: if you are 38 and you have to make a decision on a moral dilemma, and you have to err on the side of righteousness, or you walk away from that and you live to 92. If you do live to 92, when you die, your body will just be meeting your soul that died at 38. And you need to believe that there's something greater than just materialism, and it's not government. Government is not God, and unfortunately, too many people have substituted government for God. Trevor, what would you like to add before we go?
In that I agree. We have lost so much in Canada at the hands of this government. It is shameful. I would argue that it is criminal in many cases. That this country, which was a peaceable, wonderful place to live, has become a country, a stinky, smelly country, at least in its cities, of lazy, entitled people. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the aspirational Canadians sitting at home, cowering, afraid. It's time to discover courage again. It's time to discover what made Canada great again, and go forth and implement, do it. As I've repeated time and time again, Napoleon said it: l'audace, l'audace, toujours l'audace. Audacity, audacity, always audacity. Canadians need to discover that.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much. I just want to share with one last story about how incredible Trevor is. So I was going off to England to speak, and Trevor says, you gotta come, you gotta come, you gotta come to this event. So I come there, and Lord Black is speaking. And I'm there. I feel honored that I'm there because Trevor said, like, you gotta come. So I'm walking to sit down. He said, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to find a spot. And Trevor said, no, you're sitting next to Lord Black. And there were like 400 people in the room. Trevor,
he is an absolute prize of Canada. People need to read his stuff, listen to him.
Can you get him on a call with me?
Oh, I can certainly try. We're back and forth now and then on some stuff. Looking forward to getting him out again to talk to the troops and rally like Henry V did at Agincourt. Thank you so much.
And, well, thank you, Trevor. And I just want to end with this. Trevor is one of the brightest people I know. Not only does he have a knowledge in Canadian history, he's a scary smart guy in tax. And if you are thinking about reorganizing your business or feeling that you might want to exit Canada, Trevor's someone you should go to because he knows his stuff and he's scary smart. And then, like most people who have all books behind them, he's actually read all those and probably several other bookshelves.
Good chunk. You give me too much credit. Pete, stay free. God bless. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much.
Anytime.